I'm Olof Redmalm, creative director and lead writer on Lost in Random, and I previously worked on Ghost Giant as director as well.
I'm Klaus Lingeled. I am now head of development / creative monkey at Zoink, and previously lots of other projects.
What can you tell us about the story of Lost in Random? Like, give our viewers a brief introduction into this world and these characters.
Well, it's a story about a girl and her dice and their journey through the world of random, and it's really a coming of age story where Even tries to find her place in a world of crazy randomness and to come to terms with randomness itself. And this world is controlled by this mad queen who is obsessed with board games, and she has this one true dark dice with which she rules the world. And there used to be lots of dice everywhere, but for some reason she didn't want other dice to be around. She just wanted her one true dice to be there to rule everything, to get some kind of some sense of control over a random world. And Even and Odd are the two sisters who grew up in one croft, because there are 6 realms of random: 1 croft, 2 town, 3dom, 4 burg, 5 tropolis, and 6 topia, and strange places in between. In this world, when you turn 12, the queen comes to your hometown and gives you the grand honor of rolling her one true dark dice. And Odd turns 12, Even's bigger sister. And on her 12th birthday, the queen comes, of course. She rolls the dice and gets a 6. And so she gets taken away to Sixtopia, where she'll live a supposed dream life. But Even senses something is wrong, and her dreams tells her that she has a vision of her sister in trouble, and that sets her off on a journey through random to save her sister from the clutches of the Mad Queen.
There are dark themes, and there's like a Tim Burton dark art style kind of at work here. So what inspired this game's story, and what inspired your design of the world of Random?
I think when we came out of of course, Ghost Giant, which Ula was game director on, and then Flipping Death, which I was taking care of, and then the previous games too, is that we had done a lot of humorous games, cute kind of games, looking games, and I really wanted to go into something more darker, and we were looking for something darker to do. And obviously I'm a big Nightmare Before Christmas fan, Tim Burton fan, and I think we were just searching for something dark and looking around for something. And one day I found this painting from Sean Tan, which is I think he's Australian or New Zealand painter, which is like a girl with just holding a dice, and I thought, oh, it'd be so cool if what if you were like a girl who had a living dice, like a dice that could run around with you, and what does that mean then? What could you do in the game? And then all these things that just spawned out from that and came from actually, well, if you have a dice, what can you do with it? Can you be inside a board game? Oh yeah, that would be cool. And how would that work then? And what kind of world would it end up being? And then everything just grew from there and exploded kind of from the dice itself. So the dice itself is really the center of the game, but it's also just a real feeling that just wanted to do something darker and just do a more darker palette sort of for the games.
We're all big stop motion animation fans as well, and in most Zoink games we try to capture this kind of handcrafted look in one way or another. And now we had it's our biggest project yet, and with a bigger budget than ever, so we could afford more realistic graphics, but we still wanted to keep it handcrafted, and instead of making something hyper realistic, rather we wanted to push the handcrafted style, like putting little thumb fingerprints in clay houses and getting that stop motion claymation feel.
People have already said that Tim Burton, Nightmare Before Christmas, but has anyone talked about Henry Selick's work, James and the Giant Peach, Monkey Bone? This is stuff that I see in your visual aesthetic. It's almost like someone from those films came in and worked on your game. That's how much you nail the aesthetic.
Of course, Henry Selick was he was the director on Night Before Christmas. So there's obviously an interconnection there, you know. But I think also looking at just the latest movies from the Leica Studios, of course, which obviously are much more clean and nicer looking now than the older stop motion stuff. But I think, definitely. I mean, a lot of, I would say, like, sometimes you think like, oh, stop motion. I mean, it's not so much the way things are moving in stop motion that we try to copy. It's more like just the feeling of sort of the coziness of crawling into these universe in a way, like that they're just they feel small somehow. It still feels like you're inside a set, you know.
I do want to talk about the characters. Like, we know a lot about the Queen and we know about Even and Odd, but I'd like to know more about Dicey. Like, what is Dicey's story? Is Dicey a lost dice that Even just finds in the world?
Yeah. Dicey is one of many ancient dice found in the Valley of the Dice, and he is a bit of a mystery. While he's very straightforward and easy to get along with and interact with, you get a sense that he's of course holding a lot of secrets if you only know what to ask, but you know, he's quite innocent, and it's like, oh, why would you be interested in what happened 1,000 years ago? Like you could assume that he knows a lot about the world before the no dice war, when all the dice were banned. But he is really, like, the character is to me, he's kind of, when we writing him, we were looking for like the optimistic kind of happy, the joyfulness of life manifest in this character, this being that follows Even, and he's always just I mean, while he's also a force of joy and cheeriness, he's also a force of destruction, and for better or for worse, you know, he can affect the different board games and weird systems that the Evil Queen has put into place. So he has a lot of power in him, which makes him at the same time quite scary and gives Even a lot of respect for him. You know, there's one point in the game when she rolls the dice and realizes that, whoa, he actually controls these, he can affect these giant robot colossi that are waging war against each other in freedom. So he's really a force to be reckoned with. And it's like Dicey himself doesn't always realize it himself. You know, he gets thrown into combat, and then as soon as you get out, and he unleashes all these crazy powers out of his head, and as soon as you get out of combat, he's like, oh, where to now? But yeah, of course we looked at inspiration. Like, obviously R2D2 is a great inspiration of just this bucket that it's just a bucket, but it still has so much personality, and it's a great way for the character to think out loud, to have someone to bounce with. But in a way, Even and Dicey are one and the same. They are a character together. You can't have Even without the other, and the other way around. Yeah, Dicey awakens because Even finds him, so he seems to be destined for her.
I also sometimes feels like there's a bit of references to movies like Iron Giant.
Yeah, definitely.
Because Iron Giant has, like, you know, kind of in a way a very innocent character, but has a lot of powers hidden inside it that it can't really control.
Certainly.
But the story behind, just to understand, I don't know if we said it, but the story behind, like, really where he comes from is that Even really goes out into this world to look for her sister, and on the way, of course, she finds the Valley of Dice, and the Valley of Dice where you find your personal dice. So it's a personal dice that really is perfectly fitted for Even, you know. So you imagine anybody could go to this place and actually find something that fits for them, and in there's like, you know, 6-sided dice, 100-sided dice, you know, rainbow dices, you know, any kind of type is in there that fits anybody, you know. And of course she gets like this little cute character that fits her personality, basically.
How did you go about designing the combat mechanics? How were you able to implement the idea of rolling dice in mid-battle without excessively slowing the flow of combat?
A lot of tweaking and trying out, you know, it's a perfect balance for like waiting for the roll to happen and you know, at the same time playing on classics, like, I mean, like some this isn't an RPG, but some Western RPGs do have this pause and play mechanic that we wanted to kind of manifest in the world itself, like so it is in a way a familiar system, but more manifested in the world through this character and the actions of the character. What do you say, Klaus?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you have a good references to the games that we played, of course. But yeah, I was also in the beginning. I mean, when we came up with the design, it was really like looking at what's interesting in a board game. And when you play a board game, it doesn't have action, of course. It doesn't have the full on, you have to run around and you have to, the tactile feeling of fighting actually is not in a real board game. But you have that part. I remember Martin Storm, who's one of the lead designers on it, he was like, well, when you play a board game, you really throw a dice and then you get something and everything stops and it's your turn to think about what do you have to do now. And that's what happens in the board games. Then you make your decisions and then you continue, basically, and it has similarities here. It's really like, oh, I'm fighting, and then, oh, I get to throw my dice. Pause. Okay. Whew.
It's my turn.
Down. Yeah, it's my turn. Look at it. What can I do now? I pick that. I do that. Okay. And then let's go again. Boom. And everything starts and you're like in there, fighting, chaos, and then you can do it again. So it's that kind of feeling of mixing like the chaos of normal sort of battle games, with basically the feeling of tactileness that you have in some board games. Obviously it's not the same because you're not playing with feel, but it's just I really like the flow of it, that you get into, like I can actually take a breather and then think about it. And then of course over time, not to spoil too much, we do introduce some mechanics that actually sometimes stops you from taking that breather and so on. So we sort of evolve it over time. And
also this an example where we try to tie in the narrative in the game is like we also wanted this dance. I remember I was talking about dance between being this little girl who's like has just her little catapult shooting at these giant robots coming at her, and so there's every battle kind of starts out with that progression where you start out as you're just this kid with this slingshot. But as soon as you start shooting off these crystals with a slingshot, you grow in power. Suddenly you have like a ghostly arm that manifests with the giant hammer and even gets super strength. And then you have bombs. And so going between just a little girl and a big superhero smashing robots. And I also remember I was talking about, a reference is the board game in one, it's the first Harry Potter movie where they get stuck in a giant board game. It doesn't work that way in Lost in Random, but it was definitely that feeling of these giant pieces and these kids controlling this very deadly board game that it felt very exciting to me. I remember because I was a kid back then, and I remember how
everybody loved that scene.
It felt safe, but because you're following kids, you don't think they're gonna die, right? But it's still very scary. It feels very, very deadly and threatening, which adds to the dark feeling of the story.
You guys mentioned you have so many of these like elements in the combat that make it very fluidic, but you have a lot of these different kind of, like I said, mechanics in the combat. Did you guys take any inspiration from like Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories? I mean, that's like the only game that used like a card-based deck system that was kind of real time, where you would run around the field and do attacks. Very similar to what I've seen in your gameplay video.
No, I haven't actually played it, but there are several designers, and I know playtesters who have name dropped Kingdom Hearts and felt it felt similar to that, and how it's very story driven and kind of easy to get into combat. What do you say, Klaus?
No, I have same thing here. I feel like kind of stupid that I haven't played that, but honestly, so I guess could be that some of the designers have taken inspiration. Sure, I mean we're a big team that creates this, so yeah.
Too busy making games rather than playing them. That's the game.
Yeah, but I mean, some of the designers probably, and sometimes, of course, that happens all the time. That you don't even know what you're inspired by anymore. You just create something, but you are inspired from something, of course.
Yeah, and for me, for one, I love the Fable games. That I think for me, that's my Kingdom Heart. I think not those have, of course, very simple combat. I think ours is more complex, but it's still that sort of dance between narrative and getting into a fairy tale and then into an ambush and action and stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll make this my last one because I think Greg has a few questions he wants to ask himself. But once Lost in Random is out the door, it looks like you found your wheelhouse in this darker Burton-esque kind of fairy tale. So once Lost in Random is out the door, is the team going to continue to focus on these darker type of fairy tales for your future games, or are you going to move into something a little more lighthearted?
Good question. The other day I was actually pitched internally that like we should make a dating game. So I'm like, you know, with aliens. I think it was. I thought it was a great idea. You know, I think. I mean, when we started Lost in Random, it was really thinking about how can we. We never really done like a sequel, but with this game, I feel like I could do a sequel because we really worked a lot on trying to create a universe that feels like really, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of characters that really care about. And when we came out of this game, we felt like, oh, it'd be cool. What happened when she's older? Or what happens when it's this? Or what if there's other dice wielders and so on? So making games is a journey, and it's always fun to travel different places. And we're quite open to a lot of different things. But I wouldn't say that we're locked into some kind of darker theme right now. I mean, I love doing the lighter kind of humor games too. So, yeah.
You have this fully realized story from beginning to end. You have these character arcs, this full compact story that works on its own, but the universe remains a bit of a mystery. There's not everything gets cleared up, and it kind of sticks with you and lingers with you and makes you think about what does this imply, and what's happening beyond that wall that they mention, and on this. This weird guy has a like this skeleton dude has a seven dots tattooed into his forehead. What does that mean? And is there a seventh world, or like you know, a lot of hints at weird stuff. So there's so much to explore, and of course during this time, because it takes so long to create a game, you amass lots of ideas. You open a pile for that you don't have time to make, and stuff that you had to cut that could have been saved for another game. Yeah. So yeah.
And if you can talk about it, if it doesn't lead to spoil territory, obviously there's a lot of different types of dice in our world. You know, D20s, D10s, D8s. Do those dice exist in your game?
I was going to ask that. I was thinking about asking whether
would it blow people's minds?
Well, I can say that there's a card, an ability called D8 of Hate, and there's one card that's called Critical 20. But I will leave it at that unless Klaus wants to add something.
No, I mean, like I said before, is that when you go through the valley of die, then you'll definitely get to see a lot of weird versions in there, and yeah, it's explored in the game, definitely. Yeah.
And then my other question is, we've seen so many games with a very short gameplay loop that are online, you know, like arena shooters, battle royales, whatever. Can you talk about some of the difficulties you face when making a narrative-driven game where you have to hold the player's hand and make handcrafted experiences for them to play through?
I mean, to begin with, when the idea came up, of course, the first thing that comes to mind with randomness, it's like unlimited possibilities, like in a roguelike. And that's at first where the mind went, but then we realized, but we are a narrative-driven studio. We want to tell a focused story, so we got to narrow it down. So it's not, the gameplay is not so much about random outcomes as the theme is. So the randomness of gameplay comes into combat, while randomness is more dealt with through narrative. And so it turned out to be we made it more a more fairly linear hub-based kind of exploration game where you go from realm to realm. There's still exploration within the realms, but in the end it's a story from A to B. You even has to get through this land of randomness, fight her way through to find her sister, hopefully. And so wanting to tell that story and explore these different art styles, that's what made sense to do this time.
I obviously think that making a narrative-driven game is much, much harder because you have to do both an amazing story, plus you also have to do an amazing gameplay design. And I would say, like, one of the things that if you look at, for example, Flipping Death or Ghost Giant, I mean, they're quite simple game design, and there's not very innovative in the game design itself. It's more like the universe itself and the characters that are put in there and how it's put together. Well, that's not true. I think Flipping Death is innovative, but but it's not. But like with this game, we really tried to look more of a very tight mechanical design, like the way it's actually put together, how it works, you know, how it actually feels when you pick the cards and how it can be expanded. And I think that's something that, of course, you really have to have in an online multiplayer game or something like that, because that's really where the core is only, I mean, there's no real story in those kind of games, so you really have to make sure that super shines. I think in this game we felt like we need to look more at that. We need to get better at actually making gameplay, just standard gameplay, game mechanics and gameplay, and that's also why this game is taking more time. So we have like aim to be better at making gameplay, and of course at the same time also add all the stuff that we usually do with story, and add that whole layer of what we're good at with story on top of that. It's a good question. It's a complicated question also.
But it's like
think,
one thing that I know, like in like for one, like while it's one big challenge is making the gameplay lift up the narrative, and the other way around, like make them lift each other and work with each other, and that's what was so good about the idea from beginning, that it's interesting to tell a story about dice and randomness, and it's interesting to and make sense to make gameplay around that, so they really help each other out, I think. And we really always try to make it so that the gameplay is actually in the world, is taking place. You are the even is taking up an actual dice, rolling it, and the time is actually freezing, and rather than you pressing a space bar and everything just tick. But to go back to challenges, one thing I know, like one big challenge with making a narrative-driven game, especially when you have you want to explore these 6 realms, because it makes sense. They are tied to a 6-sided die, and so you make this great epic story. But if you start to run out of time and you feel like you really need to cut something, it's very difficult. You can't just cut, or maybe you could, but in our case, it turned out very difficult to just cut 3 town, for instance, and jump straight onto the next part, because it makes sense thematically to explore them all.
It was hard to cut in the story, definitely. And
so if you make it, you get it.
Yeah. Also, I just want to tell you, like, I have a really deep respect for people who makes online multiplayer again, or online games, and so to ask me the question, what's the difference, or what's the challenge, the difference, is that I couldn't actually answer it, because I've never really made an online game, so I don't really know what the challenges are really there. I'm sure they are very tough too.
And I have 2 more quick questions. Hopefully I can get them in. So we talked about Flipping Death before this. Me and my wife love that game so much. Will we see some of that dark humor return in this game, and like the chainsaw juggler, stuff like that, the dentistry jokes? That stuff is so great in that game. Will we see some of that return into Lost in Random?
It's the same dialogue writer, and Klaus and I worked on the story on Flipping Death and now on Lost in Random, so it's the same story team.
Yeah.
It's a little bit toned down, right?
It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. It's not as like humorous in your face, so wacky. It's not so wacky as this one, but it's Ryan North, of course, writing this again together with us, and there's characters. I don't know if you played Stick It to the Man, for example, but if you like Flipping Death,
I played that one too. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I noticed just the other day that there's a character in Lost in Random who has 2 personalities, and he has 2 voice actors too. And I realized the other day that I think it's the same voice actor we're using in Stick It to the Man, who also has 2 personalities. So it is somehow weirdly connected,
Same universe confirmed. That's what
exactly.
One really one interesting thing is also Ty Konsak is one of my favorite actors, who all good. Ty Konsak is one of my favorite actors, and he plays the narrator of the game. There's an omnipresent narrator following Even and Dicey around and commenting on what she does, and Even felt like someone was watching her, and you're not certain if Even is aware of him or not, but he's there and accompanying you guys like he's part of the fellowship. And that actor plays the narrator in between in loading screens in Flipping Death as well. And there's if you played Ghost Giant, in the well there in the end, like a side thing, you can actually, if you listen in the well, you can hear that narrator talking like, "Hey, excuse me, can you get me out of here?" And so he's like he's a returning character in all these different universes. So
he plays this is the same actor who plays Ray in Stick It to the Man, so he's all over the place.
Yeah, and we use the same library of actors for all our games. We return to people we worked with previously. So if you're a fan of Stick to the Man and Flipping Death, you're bound to recognize a bunch of actors. Yeah.
And my last question, I have 60 seconds. My last question is, not all games lend themselves well to physical merchandise, but this game, can we please get a toy line? Is there plans for a toy line? Can we get a
plush
statues,
Dicey?
models? Yes.
Yeah, I know. Me too. I want that too.
It's so perfect for it. It really is.
I know.
If there's high enough demand, and if people really want it, we will make it, right? if things go well. Yeah.
No, we actually have at the office we have a giant dice this big that we actually used in stand up in meetings that we had to throw every day, and we had to throw it, and that actually decided on what kind of weird stuff we had to do in the afternoon, like should we get ice cream or should we go get a coffee, that we threw that one and had to decide it.
Today everybody has to walk backwards back to their desks was one.
That's true, we had that too actually.